Now, you don't need me to tell you that the Lord of the Rings books and movies may be the best work of fantasy ever written and brought to the big screen, with heroes and villains who have stood the test of time. Worldwide known names such as Aragorn, Gandalf, or Sauron, to lesser known such as Ugluk, who still gave us very known phrases.
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
And most people are probably only familiar with the story and perspective the books and movies present, which follows the Fellowship and their journey during the War of the Ring. But we start in Isengard, with one of my favorite and best villains of all time, played by the otherworldly Christopher Lee, Saruman, and what his perspective was during this time. Saruman the White stood often at the pinnacle of Orthanc, and from there he learned the peculiar frustration of being very intelligent while the world insisted on being unpredictable. From the tower's height, everything appeared orderly. The ring of Isengard lay neat and geometric, the mountains behaved like mountains. Even the clouds, drifting past at eye level, seemed respectful enough to move with decorum. It was a view that encouraged conclusions. Saruman had always been fond of conclusions. Now, he had not begun as a villain, few ever do. He had begun as the wisest of his order, or so it was widely agreed, and more widely by himself. Knowledge came easily to him. Patterns revealed themselves like obedient students. The trouble with knowledge, however, is that after a while it begins to look suspiciously like authority. The Palantir in Isengard had not corrupted him, so much as confirmed him. Through it he marched thought against the Dark Lords and found, to his private satisfaction, that he was not overwhelmed. Pressured, yes. Challenged, certainly. But broken? No, he would not be broken. If Sauron embodied naked domination, Saruman embodied refined governance. At least, that was how he framed it. And so, when the War of the Ring gathered itself like a coming storm, Saruman believed he stood at its clever center. He invited Gandalf to Isengard with all the confidence of a host unveiling a new philosophy. From the balcony above, his voice flowed, rich and persuasive, winding through logic and inevitability. He offered a partnership, shared dominion, carefully phrased as shared wisdom. Gandalf declined. Saruman felt a deeply disappointing professional disagreement and did the reasonable thing, imprisoning Gandalf atop Orthanc, which seemed, at the time, a practical compromise. It was firm without being fatal. Saruman even felt a flicker of admiration for his own restraint. When an eagle descended and removed the prisoner in full daylight, however, Saruman was forced to confront a irritating truth. He had not accounted for avian intervention. This would not be the last oversight involving nature. But now is not the time for worry. Now is the time for the Isengard war machine. His preparation advanced swiftly. The forges roared, smoke rose in industrious plumes. If Middle-earth insisted on entering a modern age, he would see it properly industrialized. And he looked at the orcs and uruks of Mordor and pondered how one could make a version 2.0. And after much deliberation, dedication, and probably a moderate amount of old Toby, his devious, intelligent mind came up with the Uruk-hai. Bigger, badder, and broader. More armor, immune to sunlight, and most moral objections. They were Saruman's magnum opus, the finest army orcs could make. And Saruman took great pride in them. He explained this to himself often, and when he learned that the Fellowship were starting to make the way down the Anduin to fulfill the quest, Saruman made his move and sent a batch of Uruk-hai to intercept. And so we make our way from Isengard, cross Rohan, to the ruins of Amon-Hen, where the two parties clashed. Sean Bean does his classic move, and Aragorn kills a very mean Uruk. But when the dust settles, the remaining Fellowship realizes that the Uruks were successful in capturing two halflings. which was their main goal after all. And with said captured hobbits, they set off back towards Isengard. Saruman sitting in Orthanc like Dr. Evil watching the beginning of his master plan unfold. This was not to last, however, since the Uruks never made it back for unknown reasons. And with that, back to the original plan. Rohan. Rohan was meant to fall tidily. King Theoden, softened by counsel and fatigue, would remain pliable. He set off raiding parties to harass various Rohirric settlements, with some hired help from the men of Dunland, who have a long harbored grudge with the Horse Lords. He also managed to unalive Theodred, Theoden's son, at the crossing of the Isen. Yet somewhere between calculations, Gandalf returned, no longer grey and weathered, but bright and alarming. Theoden stood up, shook his head and said, "Enough is enough." Saruman found this development quite uncooperative, and so he set his big move into motion. He marched his massive army of Uruk-hai in an attempt to crush the remnants of Rohan at Helm's Deep. And I'm not gonna lie, everything seemed to go in Saruman's favor. And if you would run this as a simulation in order to find out who'd win, it would probably say Saruman 99 out of 100 times. Now I could talk about how the movie's portrayal of Helm's Deep is the best battle in cinematic history, but then we would be here for a very long time. So we'll keep it kinda short. From Orthanc, Saruman followed report with mounting disbelief. The rain fell, the walls held, reinforcements arrived at precisely that sort of dramatic moment he would have objected to on narrative grounds. And worst of all, the trees marched. And the Ents were not in any of his projections. I mean, who anticipates walking and talking trees? Yet they came. They came slowly, which would have been comforting if not for the fact that they were also enormous and very upset that their friends had been turned into fuel. And so, Isengard, that monument to right angles and progress, filled instead with water and uprooted masonry. Furnaces hissed and died, machinery that had seemed so modern and decisive gurgled like embarrassed kettles, and from the tower's window, Saruman watched centuries of careful landscaping uprooted by beings who considered conversation a leisurely activity. And after some time as a prisoner in his own fortress, the victors at Helm's Deep made their way to Isengard to figure out what had become of their adversary. Now this is where the movies take some creative freedom with Saruman, and I will not lie, I kinda prefer the movie way, because I feel it to be a more fitting end. So Gandalf and co make their way to Orthanc, and they speak about gibbets and crows, grand plans and dooms, and if Saruman can be redeemed by giving up some information. And oh yeah, Gandalf with a capital G just hits him with a
Saruman! Your staff is broken.
However, Grima is not having any more of Saruman's BS and promptly stabs him in the back, making him fall to his ever so dramatic end. Now I might cover his book ending, where he does some Shire shenanigans before fading into magical wizard dust, if I ever do a deep dive into Saruman. Anyway, time for some more 20-year-old games. See ya!